Thank you. Thank you very much and welcome. Father Mitch Packer, welcome to Threshold of Hope, where we take a look at the writings of the church. I want to mention that today is the feast of Saint Cecilia. She was a Christian woman who had taken a vow of virginity, but her parents married her off. But she convinced her husband that if he became a Christian, he would also have a vision of an angel explaining that she was to be a virgin and not consummate their marriage. And sure enough, that happened after he was baptized. And she is one of the very few women, 7 of them, besides the Blessed Mother, of course, who is mentioned by name in the first canon, Canon 1, the Roman canon of the Mass. She's also, her body was disinterred in 1599, and they discovered that she was incorrupt. And she is the first incorrupt saint that we know of. So she's a patroness of music. But then again, many of you will also remember, some of us remember very well, that today is the anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So some of us were around for that. And finally, I would mention that it was also the same day that C.S. Lewis died, and Aldous Huxley. They also died the same day. Somebody even did a little play. What would it have been like for John Kennedy, Aldous Huxley, and C.S. Lewis to meet before they went to the judgment seat of Christ and just discussing their life's work? All right, we are continuing on with Veritatis Splendor. You can get a paperback copy from EWTN's Religious Catalog. Just go to EWTNRC.com. Or if you want to call, you can call 1-800-854-6316. If you prefer, you can download Veritatis Splendor and all the papal encyclicals by going to our document library at our website, EWTN.com. There, you'll see at the top of the page, Faith tab. Click that, and you see Document Library. Click that. Type in Veritatis Splendor, and you can download it into your computer. Now, of course, we want you to be involved. One way is to come here to beautiful Irondale, Alabama, right next door to Birmingham. And you can send us your question. If you can't make it here, send a question to us by email, right into threshold@EWTN.com. All right, we are continuing on in paragraph 110.2. And in this section, remember, we are talking about the vocation of theologians, especially of moral theologians in the context of this encyclical. So he says that this is a point where he wants to deal with the specific task of moral theologians, especially those who have a mandate from their legitimate pastors, the bishops. They have a mandate to teach moral theology in seminaries and in faculties of theology. So this is a special part of that vocation, in that these teachers at seminaries and theology faculties have a grave duty to instruct the faithful, especially future pastors, future priests and deacons. And some would be future bishops as well, so that they would know all the commandments of God and the practical norms that have been declared by the church. That, by the way, is given laid out clearly in the Code of Canon Law, Canon 252.1 and 659.3, where it says, and I quote from Canon Law, "Theological instruction is to be imparted in the light of faith and under the leadership of the magisterium in such a way that the students understand the entire Catholic doctrine grounded in divine revelation of Scripture and tradition, that they gain nourishment for their own spiritual life and are able properly to announce and safeguard theology in the exercise of the ministry. Universal law and the program of studies proper to the Institute govern the formation of members who are preparing to receive holy orders. So there's especially high standards that the church requires for professors at the seminaries to make sure that the priests coming through don't look at the law of God with so much learning that they can figure out how to get out of it anyway. Sometimes this is what we think of with certain secular lawyers. They learn the law so well they can get you off of anything, right? That's not the goal for knowing moral law. It's important to know when the law applies, when it doesn't. But the goal is to live the law of God, not to get you out of it. Now, it's also very important for theologians, moral theologians in particular, to recognize the possible limitations of human arguments. Sometimes people don't always know how to explain what is right and wrong and why. Again, any number of times when you're raising your kids and they ask, well, why? Why do I have to do this? Eventually, you've got to finish making dinner. You got to finish the lawn, and you give them the basic answer, because I said so. But, you know, you'd like to give them a full explanation, but you can't always, you know, and sometimes you don't know it. And sometimes you don't know what they can handle. Well, that's true in the history of the church. You know, I knew that, you know, my mommy gave birth to my brothers and sister, but I didn't know how that got started, and they weren't about to explain it to me when I was real small. But as time goes on, you become capable of understanding more. And that happens with the church too. But the fact remains, mommy and daddy make a baby, and how I understand what they do will depend on my maturity. And with theology, it doesn't matter if you understand why thou shalt not kill. You just start off with that until you figure out why. And it's not only good for you to not kill, but it's good for the people that you were going to kill. So, you know, you follow the law until you can come up with better explanations and the reasons for the teaching. And that's what moral theologians try to do. Their job is to develop the deeper understandings and to understand the reasons underlying the teachings of the church, and to expound the validity and obligatory nature of the precepts of God. So that, you know, you want people to understand why it is necessary not to bear false witness, etc. You know, you want them to go into depth and also show how there's a connection in relationship to the ultimate end, that is the ultimate goal of human life. To see that, you know, it's going to help lead you to heaven to obey God's law. Because obedience to God's law gives you, in your own life, already a taste of the charity of heaven, but you have to then keep on going. Moral theologians are supposed to set forth the church's teaching and to give, in the exercise of their ministry, an example of loyal assent, both internal and external. So that theologians should believe, they give their assent to what's right and wrong, inside themselves as well as outside. You know, I met one theologian, well, I didn't meet him, I had him as a professor. He said, yeah, when they made us take the oath to teach what the church teaches and not teach modernism, I crossed my fingers. I said, did you take that oath in first grade? You're crossing your fingers? You're a man. If you give your word, you're supposed to mean it. You know, this is ridiculous. They should have the internal assent as well as say it on the outside. You don't assent just to keep your job so the church doesn't fire you. You assent in order to serve God and please Him by an ever holier life as a moral theologian. And this is a very important point for all theologians. To do theology well, it is necessary to grow in holiness, so that it not only is saying correct words, but that it rings true with your whole life. You know, a good bell, you know, the church bell that is, has a timbre to it, that if it's been well cast, it reverberates after you strike it. And it maintains that tone. And that's from a good bell. What we want to make sure is that we're not a bunch of ding-dongs, that we really are bells who ring true with the faith, and that it resonates and reverberates through our lives. And this is something that we have to have, and the theologians have to have in regard to the magisterium's teaching in the areas of morality and dogma, as Blessed Pope Paul VI said in Humanae Vitae, paragraph 28, when he spoke to theologians, saying, in the performance of your ministry, you teach moral theology, you must be the first to give an example of that sincere obedience, inward as well as outward, which is due to the magisterium of the church. Nor will it escape you that if men's peace of soul and the unity of the Christian people are to be preserved, then it is of the utmost importance that in moral as well as in dogmatic theology, all should obey the magisterium of the church and should speak as with one voice. I remember I was just finished my freshman year of college. I was just turning 19, in fact, a day or so around the publication of, 2 days after it was published. And on the day it was published, already certain theologians had gotten a pre-publication copy. They rented a room for a press conference on Sunday night it was published, and they protested it. They did just the opposite. And this is something that, you know, theologians' vocation isn't to argue against the church. That's why you don't want the guys working at Mercedes to show up in a Volkswagen Beetle. Working together in cooperation with the hierarchical magisterium of the church, that is, that official teaching authority of the church and the Pope and the bishops, theologians will be deeply concerned to clarify ever more fully the biblical foundations of morality, Show in the scriptures where right and wrong comes from. Explain it from the Bible. Also, the ethical significance. How do the teachings of the church on morality affect ethical behavior? This is very important at a time when people want everybody else to be ethical, but they're not so keen on being ethical themselves. We can't have this bad business practice. Now, I got a few side deals under the table here, but, everybody else ought to listen up and pay attention. We don't want anything under the table by them. No. The significance for business, government, entertainment, science, all of these ethical concerns must be brought to bear and clarified, as well as the anthropological concerns that underlie the moral doctrine and vision of man set forth by the church. Remember, anthropological concerns. Anthropology comes from two Greek words, logos, meaning study, anthropos means man. So anthropology means the study of human beings, okay? And anthropology is how we understand. Everybody has an anthropology. What does it mean to be human? Sometimes you don't reflect on it out loud, but you have one. You have an anthropology. Just why not reflect on it? Well, the idea is that the theologian reflects on anthropology and what it means, so that when you say that the church teaches, for instance, that we are against pornography. Why is that? Because part of our anthropology, our understanding of human beings, is that other people are not meant to be used by other people. They're not objects. And you are not permitted to treat them as objects, but as real persons. So that's our anthropology. And you'll have people in the world who just take something like pornography for granted as just, that's just normal, that's what everybody does, so it's okay. But the church thinks these things through and helps people understand the nature of the dignity of men and women, an equal dignity that must be respected and that lifts up everybody else. When you use people as an object, you lower yourself. That's just common sense. So that's what we mean by anthropology, and theologians should help understand that better. Paragraph 111. The service which more theologians are called to provide at the present time is of utmost importance. One of the reasons it's important at this time, not only for the church, but also for human society and culture, because too few people are thinking about the moral ramifications of behavior. People don't think about why something is right and wrong, whether it's right and wrong. Well, I just feel like doing this, and it's legal. For a lot of people, that's all that's there. Well, it's not against the law. Supreme Court said it's okay to have pornography. So, if it's not against the law, it's okay, right? Wrong. When it comes to certain things, the Supreme Court people are fools. So, remember, it was the Supreme Court that said black people are inherently inferior to whites and deserve to be slaves. You like that idea? It was legal, but not moral. We have to think about right and wrong, and not just go along with what is legal. That's too low a bar. So, what we have to do is moral theologians have the task, and they do this together with scriptural theology, biblical theology, and with dogmatic theology. So you use an understanding of God as revealed in Scripture and as taught by the dogmas of the church, to highlight that dynamic, as the Congregation for Catholic Education wrote in its document on the theological formation of future priests back in 1976. It said that your reflection should highlight that dynamic aspect which will elicit the response that man must give to the divine call, to the call of God, which comes in the process of his growth in love within the community of salvation. In this way, moral theology will acquire an inner spiritual dimension in response to the need to develop fully the imago Dei, that is, the image of God present in man. We're created in the image and likeness of God. And in response to the laws of spiritual development described by Christian ascetical and mystical theology. So this is something that we have to see, that we use science to be sure. Science is very important, and moral theologians need to study science, but they also have to see that the goal of moral theology, as that paragraph says, is to be able to respond to God's call. What is God calling us to do? And to respond to God's call means that we will become holy. You don't respond to God's call by living in sin. That's what Christ meant when he talked about people being hypocrites. When you play act at following God's call, but in actual life, you're just doing what you want and just living your sins even though you go to church. And that's hypocrisy. No, we have to understand that so that then obeying the moral law helps us grow in the spiritual life. That's what this is about here. We get closer to God and to each other. Certainly, moral theology and its teaching are meeting with certain difficulties today because people don't want to think about these things, and they haven't really been thinking too carefully in moral ways about moral theology. They want to see things in terms of political party platforms rather than thinking through the moral concerns. Have we not seen that throughout this past election year? So many times people are not thinking through the moral ramifications of the various people running for office and how they're bringing each other's sins out to bear and talking about them and all this. This is, one of the situations that we don't see enough of is thinking through the moral theology ramifications. And the church's morality involves a normative dimension. The church believes some things are right and some things are wrong. And that what God's commandments are a norm to discern right from wrong. I just had some people last week saying to me, yeah, well, the 10 Commandments were from 3,000 years ago. Hasn't human life changed? Yes, it has. But let me ask you this. Which one of you still would like to get robbed? Do you like getting robbed? Has that changed? Did I miss something? Because I don't like getting robbed. I've been robbed. I don't like it. I've been mugged. I've had my house broken into. I don't like it. Never did. So what's changed? How about this? Would you want somebody to murder you? You want that? Has that changed? I haven't changed on that. I'm in full agreement. I don't want anybody to murder me, and I don't want to murder anybody else. It hasn't changed. These are silly arguments by silly people. and we have to be more, that the church wants us to be more serious. And also, moral theology cannot be reduced to a body of knowledge worked out purely in the context of the behavioral sciences. Well, sociologists say that this percentage of young people is having sex by age 16. This percentage is using drugs. Therefore, we have to change the laws about thou shalt not commit adultery. We have to change the church's teaching against being inebriated because the percentage have changed. I can also show, I know I can't show you statistics, but I know any one of you is aware of this. Virtually 100% of the people in the world today have told lies. Does that mean you like being lied to? You might like trying to get away with a lie, but do you like being lied to? Does that make it okay because it's virtually 100%? Well, you know, what's the difference? I mean, the politicians are lying. They've been lying, and we lie, so it's okay. This is called dumbing down morality. Everybody already smokes marijuana, so legalize it. That doesn't make it healthy. It doesn't change the fact that the number of people in Colorado who have died in car wrecks while intoxicated by marijuana has gone up 132% since they legalized it. Does that make it better? Just because everybody else is doing it? That's what we don't want. The behavioral sciences are good. I'm not against sociology and anthropology. I'm not against psychology, neither is the church. Not against these things. These behavioral sciences are concerned with the phenomenon of morality as an historical fact and a social fact. They'll let you know how many people do this. They'll also try to let you know how many people in an exit poll voted this way, and then they find out that the exit polls don't work. Because the person who lost in the exit poll won because they weren't telling you the truth. There are a lot of times people are, thanks be to God, they're still embarrassed to tell you some things, you know, about morality. And they're embarrassed to tell you about some of their immorality. Though there's another study that just came out. Again, I like studies. I think it's important to take a look at, but not as the basis of morality, but for understanding what we need to do. One study showed that something like a fourth of people in Great Britain don't want to teach religion to their kids. Why not? Because they're afraid they'll get mocked in school for knowing their religion. So to avoid their kids being mocked. Now, is that a good reason to leave your children ignorant of the ways to get to heaven? No, it's a terrible idea. And this is where now the atheists are allowed to bully, but nobody else is. That's ignorance right there. So we shouldn't have any bullying. So we have to, this behavioral sciences just tell you what historically happened, what socially is going on. Whereas moral theology needs to make use of the natural sciences and of the behavioral sciences, but it does not rely on the results of formal empirical observations or the phenomenological understanding alone as a basis for morality. We look to God as the basis because social facts change. If today, I mentioned this last week, if in 1940 only 4% of children were born out of wedlock, that means that people were not having relations outside of marriage as much. It's logical. And that after birth control, abortion was made commonly available, it's gone up to 45%. Isn't that one of the ironies? It's the opposite of what they told us would happen, just the absolute opposite. So, you know, what do you base morality on that? No, you can't base your morality on that change. You have to take a look at what's right and wrong. Indeed, the relevance of the behavioral sciences for moral theology must always be measured against the primordial question. What's the most basic primordial question? What is good and what is evil? What draws us to be more godlike? What deprives us of goodness? Because evil is the deprivation of good. So what increases goodness? What deprives? But what is it to be good? And what must be done to gain eternal life and avoid going to hell is the other side. That's the primordial question, not, well, sociologists say that this, psychologists say this. Right now, psychologists say that narcissism, clinical narcissism, is on a level of mass plague. It's an epidemic of clinical narcissism. Does that mean it's okay now? Go ahead. Hang out with a lot of narcissists. See if you can get a word in edgewise, because they're always talking about themselves. Is that what you want? And say, well, sociologists say it's epidemic, so it's okay. No, it's not. There's another value about how narcissists are wrong and wrong-headed for thinking about themselves primarily and being incapable of empathy with anybody else, yet alone loving somebody else. That's what's core problem with narcissists. And it's wrong. Whereas people who build up others and cherish them and their dignity, that's what's good. These are the kinds of things we need to think about, and this is our role. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back, get some questions and emails, so please stay with us. Right. So first of all, I want to welcome you to come here and join us. If you can make a pilgrimage to our shrine and the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament up in Hanceville, please contact our pilgrimage department at 205-271-2966. Or go to the website ewtn.com and they'll give you information about scheduling of masses, programs where you can be in the audience, directions up to Hanceville in order to visit with the sisters and pray with them, and places where you can stay and go to eat. So we'd love to have you. Now, I know after this coming Thanksgiving Thursday, you probably are thinking about eating today, but afterwards you might be thinking more about working it off by going to the mall all day Friday. Not I. I don't do that. That's the last place I ever want to go, is the mall on Friday after Thanksgiving. But you know, we still will give you information on good places to eat, and only a few of them offer turkey. All right, let's take a question from our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
I'm from Murphy's, California.
Great. And your question?
I just wondered if you would comment on some of our Orthodox Catholic colleges teach their young people how to reason, and it seems like the secular colleges are they're destroying their ability to reason.
I would say that there's a lot of truth in that. what I remember seeing a book, or not a book, the movie God Is Not Dead. And it's based on a whole slew of law cases against colleges where the professors, especially of philosophy in some of these institutions, don't help the students think logically. They force the students, I would even say, indoctrinate the students on agreeing with the results of rationalistic philosophers who have already rejected God and Christian morality and claim to be based purely on science and reason alone. But they don't have them go through that process. They just want to insist on the kids coming to that agreement with them on that instead of thinking through it. And I think you have a point. It becomes a lot more indoctrination. And in addition, one of the problems I see is the reign of political correctness and political correction that makes it absolutely forbidden to say certain things except in free speech zones. Now, this is nutty to me. They have a free speech zone. The university ought to be the place where the ideas can be brought out and developed. And if you have an argument, you have an argument. Much to the chagrin of some of the people I went to seminary and college with, I used to argue all the time. And having the facts was no hindrance to me arguing vociferously. Sometimes the fewer facts I had, the more loudly I would argue. But then one of the processes is to learn that you don't know the facts, you didn't think about certain things, you don't know how to incorporate certain ideas, and you have to learn how to think more logically. And that's what I don't see going on. And the use of fairly feigned outrage over saying what's politically correct. Oh, how terrible that you would say such a thing. Look, in the university, help them to think through why this is correct or why it is not. Reread Plato. Read his dialogues and see how he trained his students to think through the issues. Train them in logic. But see, that becomes a problem. There's a philosopher named, well, I won't go into his name, but there are schools of philosophy that teach that logic is imposed by Western society, and in some places, it's even the imposition of masculinist ways of thinking, and this is unacceptable. And so it becomes anti-feminist to be logical. I might buy that, but not the way they think. But it's, this is something that, we have to pay attention to. If you are paying sometimes, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year to send your students to be indoctrinated rather than learn how to think. What you are basically doing is paying for them to run away from home. You can do that much more cheaply. And I would prefer, in some cases, make them go get a job and work until they figure out what they want to do. instead of hanging out in the college where they're going to get indoctrinated, and then send them to one of these great schools that exist out there. You can go to the Cardinal Newman Society and see lists of colleges that teach people how to think and know real facts. That would be good. That would be good. I have an email here. Hi, Father. I have a question about joy versus suffering in the area of sacrificial offerings. I'm curious to know, when we offer up ourselves to Christ for the redemption of souls, what has more power, to offer our joys or our sufferings? If the answer is sufferings, how do we offer more sufferings without having a sadistic mindset? Nick. First of all, Nick, one of the points I would suggest is that it's not healthy in general to try and manipulate what you're going to have happen to you. I mean, to offer up our joys to God is a good thing, if that's what we have. To pretend to have joy when we don't is silly. But also to offer up our sufferings in union with Christ is a good thing. And I would suggest this, Nick. We take what happens in life. That's why we had some months ago a show that we did on the morning offering. And that's what I suggest, that you pray every day. I offer you all my joys and sufferings, whatever happens in the day. The whole day is what I offer. Everything I have, everything that happens to me. And that way, I don't have to try to engineer one thing or the other and pretend to be suffering and make myself sadistic, or pretend to be joyful and make myself silly. Deal with real life and what's really going on inside you. That's what you give to Christ. Your true self, your real self, what's really there. And do so through the Eucharist, so that you are doing it in union with Christ, who is who gives himself to us in the Blessed Sacrament. That is what you worry about, not whether it's one or the other. Deal with the realities of life as they happen. Okay? We have another question from our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
Maryland, just north of Baltimore.
Good to have you here. And what's your question?
You spoke before about narcissism, and I was wondering whether you believe that that's due to people becoming more and more secular, our society.
Is it due, in a certain way, here's what I think about that. It's kind of related to our secular issues. In the government schools, are you allowed to teach the 10 Commandments anymore? No, that's forbidden, right? And you cannot really teach any metaphysical basis for right and wrong. You can say, well, you're not supposed to steal. You're not supposed to, use certain words. But they can't tell you why, because it's now due to the Supreme Court applying a principle from Thomas Jefferson's letter, that there's a separation of church and state, that therefore you can't teach any basis in metaphysics for what is right or wrong. Correct? So what do they have? What's their theory? The theory goes back to Carl Rogers and a number of other psychologists. And the assumption is this: if you get people to have a positive self-image, then they are more likely to act in a more positive way. People who have a negative self-image will act in a negative way. That's the theory. You've probably come across that. So what do? They try to teach positive self-image. Now, there's some stuff that's not bad to do that, but it's kind of like my last email question. if the positive self-image is not based on the reality of who that person is, it won't work to make them act in a better way. Just as if the negative self-image isn't based on reality, it won't help the person. If you tell someone who is, already beaten down that you're no good, of course you're going to harm them. But if you tell somebody who is a fool, oh, but you're so bright, then all you're going to do is confirm them in their follies. They'll just have a good feeling about being fools. Am I right? And that's what you have going on in a lot of situations. So everybody wins a trophy, nobody loses. That's ridiculous to me. I never won trophies for any sports growing up because I am a klutz. I was so uncoordinated. I was always the last kid picked to play on the baseball team. But I played anyway, just last. And so I didn't win a trophy. Did it ruin my life? No. I found other areas than sports to do well in. But if they told me, oh, you're the best baseball player, I would know better. I couldn't hit far. I didn't really catch well. I didn't throw far. I mean, I didn't play baseball well. That's what we played all the time. And it would be me pretending it's something. And that helps make people narcissists. So to go back to your question, because the secularized society cannot give you a basis for right and wrong, they try to manufacture a false basis in positive self-image. And as a result, people come up with being narcissists, and that the world is about me, me, me. There's even a song about, everything you do is always about you. What about me? So another narcissist was vying for attention. I generally like Toby Keith as a singer, but still, it's complaining about one narcissist because he wanted to be talked about. And so this is something, but he's reflecting a reality. And psychologists really do point out that clinical narcissism has gone wild. And something else, too. The group of people, one of the subgroups of people who have the highest self-valuation, they think that the most positive sense of themselves are sociopaths. Sociopaths have no doubt about how good they are and how bad you are. That's why they rob you or kill you. Sociopaths have great self-images. Just stay away from them. They're dangerous. Oh, that was not nice. Go ahead. What's your question? First of all, where are you from?
I'm from Loudonville, Ohio.
Good to have you here. Where's that near?
Nowhere.
All right. You're from nowhere. Now, what do you have there?
I understand statistics say that there is a real high rate of pornography use in our colleges, maybe even in our high
95%
schools.
of college kids are using porn at least weekly, if not daily.
Well, I understand there's, help for alcohol and drug abuse.
Yeah.
Is there any help out there for pornography addicts?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, there are different groups. At first, there's one group called Sex Anonymous that modeled on Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and so on. And there is, this is something that has been developed. And at first, Sex Anonymous didn't want to deal with pornography, but it's really become a problem. Kids are not doing well. Kids are not doing well at all. And in school, they're so, diverted from the attention to school by pornography. And also, now I'm hearing about it having up problems at work. They're so diverted by pornography that they're not doing well at work. They're not motivated to stay, focused on their jobs, etc. So there are a number of things you can do. One is that I recommend that they look up Dr. Peter Kleponis, Kleponis. He has done a lot of work on pornographic addiction because it becomes very addictive, really does. And there's another thing called Covenant Eyes, which is a computer program that helps people to keep pornography away. Okay, that's something that may be useful, so that people would stay away from that stuff. It's and there are a number of ways you have to deal with it. I think, because I certainly talked to plenty of people involved in that kind of thing, and one of them is to realize that there is not joy in this. It's an addictive. They keep coming back to it. But they don't find that this makes them filled with joy and so on. And also, it's an attack on the dignity of the people they're looking at. It treats them as things, as we said earlier. So this is something that, they need to, it doesn't, the other thing too, my brother-in-law was a lithographer for Playboy. And he said, those women don't look like that. I make them look like that. Not I, but my brother-in-law, by adding here and taking away there. And you're dealing with false images to which real human beings can never match. And that's one of the things people have to learn. You can't compare the real person you're married to, a real person you love, with these fakes. And this is all stupid magic from the media. All right, let's take a look at another email. 4 years ago, my wife had surgery for an abdominal aneurysm. After the surgery, she had severe leg pain resulting from numerous different doctors and tests with negative results. Large amounts of pain pills that barely relieved the pain. Numerous hospital stays because of side effects of medicine. Several months ago, kidney failure, and finally she was finally placed on a ventilator. After 92 days hospitalization, she passed away. She had all the faith in the Lord, and at the end I told her we needed a miracle. She pointed upward and smiled and moved her lips and said, "He will." This really rocked my faith as to why one person has to endure such long-term pain, while many undesirables, what are you running for office, never have a problem. I feel my prayers are all in vain. It will take a long time for I ever regain my faith. Can you help? Comment. Daryl in Texas. Daryl, this is very much a mystery of pain and suffering. I don't think that you can come up with any reason to explain why some people suffer so much and they didn't do anything wrong. They say, well, it's not related to their bad behavior. You can say for a drunk, when he has a hangover, it's related to being a drunk. But not with this. And, this is something about faith where you have to say, all right, as Catholics, we can look at this kind of suffering and say, Christ suffered tremendously. Matter of fact, I have a saint on the wall here, Saint Rafka, who suffered tremendous pain and united it with Christ. She didn't get healed of the pain. She died. But now she's become a source of others seeking her intercession, and great healing comes for others because of her pain. Do I understand why that happens? No. But I know that it does. And so that's a great mystery that I can't solve, but eventually it's your faith relating to God that will help you do that. Well, may Almighty God bless you and keep you, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving holiday. but also ask you to keep us in between your gas bill, electric bill, and cable bill, because we still have our bills over the holidays too. God bless and thank you.